This video contains a sigil that broadcasts it directly into hell. Whenever you play this, it creates a disturbance and provides entertainment for people in hell who aren't having very much fun. The more you play these videos, the more disruption you create. The sigil was created by occultist S. Rob.
Speak of the devil, and he shall appear.
We're not here because we're free. We're here because we're not free. There's no escaping reason, no denying purpose, because as we both know, without purpose, we would not exist.
Gee, Ray, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
My God, it would be beautiful.
This is the World Magic Movement. Tonight's episode, Time After Time.
My name is S. Rob, and I'm talking to Saul Ravencraft.
Hello, Rob.
Yeah, and I thought we'd talk about time. You know, time slips, because I actually heard about a very interesting one recently. It's actually from America. And it was basically these two guys were driving this car. You know, they had the window down, and they saw in front what looked to be like a mint condition, as they said, turtleback car. I think that's how you would know in America. And it was in mint condition with the number plate. So they're driving along, and unusually said the woman and the child were both dressed in like 40s costume to match the car, which I must admit I didn't think was that strange, because they tend to do that over here. You know, if they go to a car show and it's of a certain age, they all tend to dress up. But this is the weird bit though. The woman, so they were driving beside, and they looked over, and she looked quite alarmed, tearful. So they wind the window down and ask her if she needs any help. Yeah? So she says she does. So they pull in front of her. Now, there's no way she could get off. This is just a straight road. And then they got out and the car disappeared. But the weird thing then is another car pulled up, and he said, where did she go? There was a car there just in front of me, and it just blinked out of existence. And I just thought that was great, because you know yourself, time slips, it sort of crosses over with hauntings. Now that's the thing, is that a haunting? Is it a ghost car, you know? Is it a time slip? I really think it's a time phenomena. But it's great, isn't it, that you've got witnesses in two cars, so they didn't know each other, two sets of witnesses, you know, of this car being there and then blinking out of existence. You know, it's an interesting thing.
I did an interview several years ago with a man named David Roundtree, who is a paranormal investigator, and he was also pursuing education in physics. And he was going on chat rooms. One of the things that he was doing that was differently than a lot of sort of haunting investigations was he was doing his best to use modern scientific data collection methods. He had a laptop with sensors. He had something that would track information and correlate it. So everything was time-stamped. The temperature and the barometric pressure and the audio recordings and visuals and all that were linked together, so that when you had a piece of information that came about, you could connect it with the others. In a way that was meaningful. This is the way scientific researchers do things. And so he had this data in a standard that was familiar to physicists, and he was going into some of these chat rooms where people hang out and talk about physics. And he would put this data out there and say, I have this data, what do you think about it? What do you think this could mean? And they would chat about it and different possibilities of what they thought they were seeing and what that might mean. And then eventually someone will say, well, where did this data come from? And then he would explain that it came from a haunting that he was investigating. And what he said was that when a lot of the data was looked at, in that context, that it correlated quite a bit with some of the quantum physical concepts of wormholes and things like that. And he said that it may be that some of what we experience as hauntings, that there may be tiny little wormholes floating around, are more common than we realize. And that we may actually be experiencing some connection that takes us back, or allows us to observe through time and space into something that is not here and now, but just sort of a tunnel back to that. And that if that was the case, it would make perfect sense for me to be in the right space at the right time to look through that tunnel and see something, and for you to be right next to me and not be able to see it.
Yeah, that's actually quite similar to end of reality point theory, which is the idea that you've got, for want of a better word, these flaws, they're basically, not flaws, these end of reality points where normally you don't notice them because it's concealed, it's cloaked. So most of the time you're walking past a wall, and if there's something there, you won't know it because of the cloaking mechanism to conceal it, and a reset mechanism as well. I'll talk quite shortly about it. And what it is that the idea that you only notice it when something goes wrong. And that was the concept of the paper I wrote. It was quite a while ago now. And the idea that these things are actually happening all the time, that these things are around us. And what happens is with these points is that most of the time it's done perfectly, or maybe a brick in a wall is from maybe a different time, but you don't notice it. And it's only when something goes wrong that you get these, really bad things, or these really obvious things. So it means that what we're looking at is a phenomenon which happens all the time, but it may be that something was from 1 second ago, or a nanosecond ago, and so you don't notice. And so it's just that it's only when it goes spectacularly wrong that you get these big deal things, But I actually got a very interesting thing to say. I've just remembered an event which happened to me, actually. Because, when people talk about these time slips, it's always somebody else, or somebody you know. And this was with a strange thing, is what we used to do is, it was actually on a Saturday. Me and your father, we used to go out, we just used to pick places, We'd be in all the museums, so we found somewhere in the newspaper. And it probably was going to be pretty crappy, but it was just some, warehouse place. And also sold things to the public. And it was just off Pennywell, which, if anyone knows, is not a great estate. Okay, I won't talk about it, but it was off there. And what we did, we were driving in this car. He was actually driving, and the road was completely empty. And we just had an idea, because I think it was not long after the Pirates of the Caribbean film came out, and we had an idea. Because we both looked, we thought, I wonder if you could change, how time passes, or how things passes by a phrase. Now, we wanted it to happen, but we didn't really. You would just use something from the film. So he said, we're lost. He said, yeah, you've got to be lost to find the place that can't be found. Otherwise, everyone would find it. And immediately on seeing that, cars flew in every direction across the road, but at incredible speed. Meaning, in the place of about 3 seconds, all the cars had went and it'd clear, and it was clear again, as it was before. That is only the start of the weirdness. We then went there, we got the car, and we got out, and we went into this place. Right, you're walking around, people are looking at us, not realise why they're looking at us, and that's the strange thing, is that this is a place for the public, and yet for some reason, we were really bloody interesting to these people. And we're walking around, and, and this stuff, some of the stuff looks pretty crappy, and there was but there was a kid's version, I remember, a kid's version of Socrates, which was a very small, sort of comic book version for kids. But what they had, and I swear to God, they had for sale slot machines that did not take the modern money. And you're talking, the money you're talking was more like 1980s money. And this is in the past year 2000, this is in the 21st century. Why would they possibly have had them? And, this is a wholesaler that wouldn't have kept dead stock like that. they'd have got rid of it, it just wouldn't be lying around. So we thought, this is weird, but we went back in the car, we actually went off to a pub on the way, and everything seemed to be back normal. We went back a different time. The place had been entirely redecorated and they were gone. So, yeah, what it is to me, it's not just the fact they had this stuff for sale, they took the wrong coins. It's the fact that the cars shot, past, it was at a crossroads, and they went at incredible speed, and in 3 seconds, the road went from being empty to being completely all these cars shooting around to being empty again. And that was the weird thing to me, But I also thought we were so interesting to the other people. And the other people seemed to look a bit sort of, a bit sort of shaggy, shall we say, the way they were dressed, but people do. But that was the thing that got me as well. Why were we so interesting? Because if it is a time slip, which seems likely to me, simply because cars can't move that fast. And these were old cars. You're talking things like, Ford Capris and stuff like that. These things can't go that speed in 3 seconds, They just can't. Why were we so interested? Because, okay, we would dress just in jeans and stuff like that, so it didn't look that strange. And it does make you wonder about, have you ever seen I think it's a film, it's based on a Stephen King one, where it's basically the idea is the past isn't something you can travel to. The past is sort of just some place where they get rid of, where they're moving away the scenery, as it were, from the stuff. Because that was the thing, it was sort of like we weren't supposed to be there, which the odd thing is that it was advertised in the newspaper. So you would expect that they were supposed to be there. But yet, yes, I think it was the past. It wasn't the time we were supposed to be in. But for some reason, they knew that we weren't supposed to be there. It felt like they knew they were supposed to be there. But what the hell were these people doing? So it's weird, isn't it, on more than one level?
Sure.
Maybe it suggests that there is sort of, there is time slips, but there's people in charge of it. It is weird. Weird.
Well, I've never experienced anything along the lines of what you talked about. So it's hard for me to speak to it specifically. I keep an open mind on all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it does point out, though, that time slips seem to happen when people are travelling. And that was what I was thinking at the time. I thought, I was thinking like pirate ships or ships where they're going, and then they say, oh, there is, a mermaid and this. And I thought, it's a lot of the time this stuff seems to happen when people are travelling somewhere. You never really hear of a time slip happening to someone standing still. Or rarely, They always seem to be, well, I'm in the car, I'm walking, or I'm doing this. It's never someone just sat still. People don't just say, well, I was sat still, and all of a sudden, everything around me changed. It just doesn't happen. You seem to need to be travelling. Something about travel that maybe separates or helps to separate us off from the environment,
Well, from a metaphysical standpoint, there's the idea that time is merely an illusion, that our linear experience is not exactly the way that things actually work, and that one can break free from that sort of linear experience and have effects in your past and your future and work around that. Those ideas are hard for me to wrap my head around, but there is the idea that once we get outside of this particular realm, that a lot opens up, and the way we experience time is just non-existent, that everything happens at once.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is as well, though, it seems to be that, these things seem to happen everywhere. It's not like they only happen in certain places. Because you always seem to get the idea that, it's going to be here. Like the Bold Street time slip in Liverpool is quite a famous one. I've actually known 2 people who have seen that time slip. There's one person mentioned it once and wouldn't talk about it again. And the other person again is my father. So he's been in 2. And it was, I actually believe that's why they changed the passports, or the passport system. Because in Britain at one time you had to go to Liverpool to a place very near Bold Street in order to get the passports. And now you can get them in local places. You can go like places in Newcastle and wherever. And I actually think it was because there was an amazing amount of people were going to find the passport office doing this. In actual fact, were ending up in the Bold Street time slip. And they both had the same experience. It was, they were going to the passport office and they got lost. And they're walking round. And what they both saw was a child sitting there with no shoes on, obviously dressed in very old dress. And then they kept on walking and got out of it again. But there's different experiences with the Bold Street one. There's some people seem to, if you're at different points, you seem to see a shop change, There's also was one where somebody was actually, had stolen something. And the policeman went after them and they disappeared. It was a dead end. And he couldn't understand where they went to. And so he walked back, and the person actually gave themselves up because they were just happy to be back in their own time. It turns out the person had actually went in a time slip. It got into a different time in the past. And when they got back, they didn't mind going to jail. They were just happy that they were back in their own time. And that's good proof to me because I can't imagine, a criminal giving themselves up when they got away. I just can't see that. It's, it's a strange thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting is the way that when people have these encounters, when they seem to have these time slips, that they somehow come back to their own point. Or do they? I mean, I guess there'd be no way to know that. If you came to something that was similar enough, I don't know how you'd know for sure that you were on the same track.
Yeah. To be honest, I always think the reset mechanism happens, and that's why it comes back. And I believe that if you were stuck in the wrong time, you would be altered mentally to fit in. So for my belief that a lot of the people who are lost and don't remember who they are, not all of them, but some of those people are from different times. And that connects in with what I said in end of reality point theory, the idea that, there's these not flaws in space-time, basically, these points, anyway, the end of reality points, and they are cloaked. They're probably necessary for the fabric of the universe. And, that most of the time they're concealed perfectly well. They're in space, they can even be within you, and every now and again something goes wrong. So if you see a dog-headed man, it could be, well, not obviously we did a ritual last time, but it could be that something from another dimension, but it's working within you. Do you know what I mean? And that's the whole point there. But the reset mechanism, like there was a one, I'm trying to remember the name of the village. I think it's called Bomber or something, the village. Anyway. And it was these people who were driving through this village. It's quite an easy one to find, this one, actually, this time slip. And they were driving through this village, and, isn't it nice? All the flowers, aren't the flowers are wonderful? And he dropped his cigarette and he burnt the map. And then for some reason he drove back through it again. Interesting thing, when he drove through, not just were all the flowers gone, the watch hadn't recorded the time that they had went through it, and the map didn't have a hole burnt in it anymore. So it was like it just rewound time where the mistake was, except this time he remembered it. Where normally he wouldn't, the mechanism would have concealed it, which means we could be forgetting stuff all the time, It could be that, you were just transported to 1960 and then you've just came back and you just don't remember. And that's a strong indication that this reset mechanism, will take you back to the right time, or it'll alter you to fit in. Well,
and I wonder if there's a concept of vibration one of the ideas of time, and you're saying slip, which it's like the slip road, right?
Yeah.
That takes you onto a different road. I wonder if there is a sort of a vibration that each parallel track has, and then if you end up on a vibration or on a track that is not your own, that your vibration is discordant, and you don't belong there, and that's eventually what ejects you.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean, that you're from a certain time. That's an interesting point, though. Are some of us unwittingly more like times in the past than we are the present? Maybe some of us would fit well in the past and don't fit in the present.
Oh, I certainly understand that.
Yeah, I mean, there was the idea, which I read about recently, that if you are in an environment and you're interested in it, but you're not paying attention, that's how you can cause them to happen. I've never tried it. Haven't tried it yet. But somebody said that, and they said that if they were looking at an old piece in an old place, trying to be fascinated in that, trying to be transported back, and I think it was a female, but she said that it actually worked, that she did. I think the person's long dead, unfortunately. But, and they were in somewhere where Marie Antoinette was. No, it wasn't Marie Antoinette, sorry. It was some stately home or something, okay, in Britain. And that was an interesting thing there. The idea that somehow if you're interested in something but not paying attention, that's how it happens. Because when you think about it, there's a lot of times when people really aren't paying attention to the surroundings, which means maybe it comes from us. Maybe it's just that, all reality's flown from our thoughts. So when we don't pay attention, it happens because we're not really paying attention to it properly. And then we notice it.
Well, and that fits in with the idea of time and experience being all just matters of perception.
Yeah.
That we the reality we have is filtered through our perceptions of it, and so what we see and what we experience doesn't exactly exist outside of our own head, which is an interesting idea as well.
Yeah, I always think that when people criticize things and they say, well, where's the physical evidence? And I'm thinking, well, actually, and what they're normally talking about are things where, which are different physical evidence, because they change the patterns, If you say, well, I've got this reading and the heat increased and this, if you were a physicist, they'd say, great, the heat's increased, we've got this, we've got evidence, this is it, and we can duplicate the experiment. But with some things, they literally wanted there. It's like if you said you discovered the location of a planet, I'd say, okay, but you've got to take me there. You've got to take me there to prove it. Not just I want to go there, and then you've got to prove that I've actually travelled there and where it is in proportion to where I am now, and you end up with something that's just impossible. And they lose track of the fact that there is no physics really. All there is thought. We only really experience things. So I'm sitting in front of a table. But the table, and I'm touching the table, but it's really only physical to me because I experience the idea of touching the table. So all there is thought. There isn't really anything else. The idea that is this big solid lump of table is just an idea, really. Even physicists don't even think it's solid anymore, Not my table specifically, but you know what I'm saying? No, the idea that there is just really thought. That's all there is. There's nothing else. And it's an unusual thing to be in because we have to then admit that basically a lot of things are just best guess, which scientists know. But for a lot of other people, the idea that we're really just guessing about stuff, that we can only make the best judgment we can on the evidence we have, is uncomfortable for many people, I think.
Well, and there are ideas that are sort of like a matrix theory, that our real existence is somehow different than our perceived existence. Not exactly sitting in pools of jelly being batteries exactly, but something along those lines. And if all of our existence is perception, you can't prove anything outside of that unless you escape it. So while you're in the matrix, you can't show anyone the matrix. You have to step out of the matrix in order to see it.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, there's a lot to, there's really a lot to go for that theory because, I think a lot of people feel that there's something wrong with just the world, but also something they can't put their the finger on, Some people, I think it's the mainstream media seems to be giving such a narrow view of reality now that people are really, it's like disconnects them from reality. But more than that, I feel people do feel that there's something not quite right, and that's probably what it is, to many people, the idea that this is a simulation. But to me, we don't necessarily literally, as you said, have to be in a tank. It's just the idea that this isn't really solid, that this solid reality is not really solid. There is really just thought, and what we're really talking about is just something which, a set of rules which have somehow got in place that helps us function. Do you know what I mean? That helps us, live our lives.
Well, sure, and I do work with people on changing their perception and creating a more manifesting environment for things they want to do. And a lot of that mode is really accepting that you get to decide a lot of what happens around you, that you're not a victim of circumstance, you're not predestined to have anything, that you can change your outlook, change your perspective on things, and what happens around you will follow suit. And I feel like in the grand scheme of things, I'm just at the very baby steps of what is possible there. But it is amazing how when you begin to think things differently, that your environment and your circumstances really do seem to respond.
Yeah, that is true, and it's because when you really talk about the nature of reality, I feel, you can't avoid talking about occultism, because it's the basis of it. And a lot of people don't understand that, they go through all the stages of occultism and they miss the basics, so it's about the nature of reality, and also helping people in will and things like this. I mean, really, if you think about it, that this table isn't real, then that means that, to me, things like love, hate, friendship are more real. They're the real things in life, But yeah, I mean, people try to avoid talking about occultism when you're talking about, real magic, when you're talking about reality, the nature of reality. But to me, if you look back, you find that the people who talked about it, the nature of reality, were occultists, But you do get people who try to avoid that part, where they go through the books and they memorize stuff. They don't realize that what you need is that first part, the nature of reality, the power of will, thought, and then when they do that, it makes sense. Because otherwise, you get to the top and you don't realize it's, in some ways, it's just like a circle, You can enlarge the circle, but you just keep going round. It's more about growth more than, just memorizing stuff, Yeah. But, it's a strange thing, time, because we're a part of it. Do you know what I mean? We're caught up in it. And yet, as you said, scientists believe it's an illusion, and yet we're still caught up in it. And that's what I feel is interesting about a time slip, is because we experience it, but yet, for a moment, we're not caught up in time. Because if we think about it, we're really a slave to time. We've got so much of it, and it drives us along. We don't have a choice of saying, well, actually, this time, I'm going to skip an hour. We don't. We normally just go along in the same direction. Yeah, you can use astral projection and all sorts of things to experience different places and time and things like this. But what we're talking about is the idea of just ticking forward. And a time slip is freedom. For one small part, you're free of time. And that's how I like to think. If that small part you're free, that's what it would be like to be free of time. You know, things would be happening, but we would be in control of it more, you know. You know, you'd have maybe cars would be travelling around really quickly, or you could slow them down, you know, and you could go back an hour or go forward 100 years, you know. It's a type of freedom is what it represents, really. You know, maybe it's the start of something. Maybe it's the start of a freedom that humanity will eventually reach but haven't yet.
Yeah, but what will actually happen if we get any significant developments in time manipulation is Amazon will simply own the technology to send you things before you order them.
Yeah, that's sad, isn't it? That's an interesting thing. You could patent things before they've been invented. Yeah. There's going to be a real mess there, isn't there? There will be a lot of money to be made with this. So, anyway, my name's S. Rob, and I've been talking to Saul Ravencraft. My name is S. Rob, and I'm talking to Saul Ravencraft.
Our conversation about time slips reminded me of a story that has fascinated me for many years. Now, I haven't obsessed on it. There are people that probably know a lot more about this than I do. But the story is just fascinating. I first learned about this on Art Bell, the Coast to Coast AM show with Art Bell. Somewhere around 2000, Bell began talking about this, and the first time I heard about it, it was interesting. But the more I dug into it, the weirder it got, and so it's a man named John TITOR. And John TITOR was claimed to be a time traveler, and he just showed up on this chat forum. You know, back in the olden days, before we had a Facebook, people would go into these chat rooms and things like that evolved from the old bulletin board systems, you know, from dial-up days and everything. And this guy just showed up in the chat, and he claimed to be a time traveler from the year 2036. And he was on a mission. He'd come back to get an IBM 5100 computer that for some reason was needed to solve problems then, and they didn't have the part or the information that they needed, and so he had come back to get one of these things to help whatever it was they needed to do. He wasn't completely clear on that. He had descriptions of what led to his future. He lived in a dystopian future, post-nuclear war, all gone to hell. And you know, it seemed like something out of science fiction, but there were things that he said that just rang kind of true. He didn't seem bent on trying to prove his case. Yet when people started challenging him on some things, he just, I don't know. He wasn't, you know, when someone is trying to present performance art, there's a tendency to push it really hard, and he wouldn't necessarily try to answer every question or have an explanation for everything, and it's a very bizarre story. Some of the things that he talked about that he predicted, but yet there are some parallels, and there are some things sort of around the time period that it's like if it had gone this way, then you could future that he painted, but it went this other way, and it was different.
Yeah, because the thing is, people are always saying, but if there's time travel, where are the time travelers? You know, there's a time traveler. It does answers a lot of questions, doesn't
Sure.
it? You know.
Well, and you know, I can imagine that if you were an actual time traveler, that you wouldn't necessarily travel back in time and then call the present. You know, go on the chat shows or something like that. That you would want to fly casual. um, but John Titor is just fascinating to me, and one of the things that the Titor experience does bring up is the idea of these tracks, and you know, the vibration, like what we were talking about in the other segment about time slips and such. That if you were to go back and make a connection, would you necessarily go back to your own time connection, or would you detour in some way? And you know, are all, if you went back, would everything continue the way it had before? And to your case, it seemed that some of the things that he expected didn't happen exactly the way he expected them to, and he seemed puzzled by that as well.
That's the thing, isn't it? Because if you were sending somebody from the future in 2030, which is when he came from, isn't it? Isn't that far ahead? That's an interesting thing. He wasn't saying the year 3000. He was saying, you know, a time fairly near ours now. But people always assume if you're going to send someone back in time, you'd send someone who knew all this stuff, but they wouldn't. The scientists and the people who really knew how this stuff worked, you'd keep them safe. And you'd probably send people who were nearer to military guys, you know, who they maybe knew a lot of science and things, but basically military guys you'd send, or maybe spies, you know. I can't imagine that you'd send Albert Einstein, you know, through a time machine just in case he didn't come back, you know. So they wouldn't necessarily know how everything works. I mean, the people who, you know, who use the space shuttles and the things like this to go to, you know, the moon, or to go into orbit and things like this, do they really actually know how it all works? They've probably got an idea, but do they actually know, really? I mean, you know, these things are designed by teams of people, and you've got mathematicians and physicists and chemists and people of all types and computer scientists and armies of people. So the guys that are actually travelling, there's only so much they can know really about it, you know, no matter how clever they are. So it makes sense, doesn't it? You'd send them back for a particular mission. He wouldn't know everything. As you say, he didn't fill in every blank. The stuff he didn't know. And as you said, that sort of makes more sense, that he wouldn't. And the idea that we change tracks, that makes sense to me as well. You know, the idea that you'd send a guy back and it would change something. You know, that or the knowledge he told you would help you find a different path. Maybe not a better path, maybe a better path, maybe a worse path, but a different path, a different future. You know, it does make sense to me. You know, it all sort of seems to connect.
Well, and there's been a lot of analysis of the conversations, and if you look up John Titor, you can find all sorts of you can find transcripts, you can analysis by different people. I'm looking at some of the transcripts right now just to see what I can line up here. And the one of the things that I'm looking at talks about predictions that he'd made, trying to line those up with the transcripts that I have. He did predict a third world war. He predicted a lot of unrest. He said that everything began. The crazy really began around the time of around 2001 when there were election issues that had happened, or I guess 2000 rather. No, because that would have been when he had talked. It was next election. Well, it would have been when Obama was elected. And that there was some craziness that occurred with the election. I guess it also might have lined up with George Bush's second election. I'd have to review the notes. Like I said, I don't have all these dates in my head. I'm not a fanatic, just fascinated by it. But there was a period of time, and we were coming up on that time, and it didn't happen the way it was supposed to. Things bubbled up, and it looked like things were going to get pretty crazy, and reason sort of reigned, and it didn't turn into violence and all of that sort of thing as it had happened. And so that, and those were points where when someone, well, you said this was supposed to happen about this time, it didn't happen. He said, well, I don't know. That's weird to me too, because I remember that it did. TITOR also claimed to have made contact with his family and his younger self.
Yeah, because that's the thing. What would you tell your younger self? Because the thing is, if you may actually be getting rid of your current self, But what would you say? People always say, "Well, I'll tell them this and that." But I always think, what you'd end up doing if you're not careful, if you could only say like one sentence or maybe 1,000 words, would just be a sound bite. Do you know what I mean? Because life isn't really the stuff you need to know in life. Really fits in sound bites. But an interesting thing is, people always say, like time travellers, that maybe they'll have trouble fitting in. And I'm just thinking, there's a guy in my general area, and basically he cycles round in traditional German costume. So he's got the little short shorts and the hat and all that. Do people think he's a time traveller? No. I'm just thinking of all the steampunk stuff. I mean, there you are, you're a Victorian gentleman, you walk around, all you have to do is to walk into a steampunk convention, there is no problem. It's actually easier to fit in now than at any other time, isn't it? Because people just don't think there's anything about it. We've got so much choice that nobody would really think. They just think, oh, that guy's wearing an old jacket. That's all it would be, Even if you went straight what you're wearing now, off from the past, and you went to this time, nobody would care. Nobody would think he's a time traveller. He doesn't know. People just wouldn't, There's so many other explanations that people just wouldn't think about it, I mean, let's be honest, if you can cycle around in, not just the town, but places around generally, in traditional German folk costume, which it stands out because it's like white, with the little thingies and the red shorts and nobody cares, then I think you could pretty much, you could be a time traveller with ease and no one's going to notice unless you wanted to. So, if he hadn't came forward, there's no way you would have known, which means we don't know how many there is. There could be loads, because people just wouldn't enter people's minds, that there could be.
Well, and I think the truth is that for the most part, people don't really pay any attention to anything outside of themselves. Something very powerful could be going on right next to you, and as long as they didn't block your car, you'd never say anything about it. We get very focused, and that focus seems to be turning further and further inward. We aren't paying a lot of attention to what's going on around us, and we are encouraged now to come up with. There's the whole worship of the Occam's razor concept, that whatever, when Occam's razor says that the simplest solution is the most likely solution, and we've sort of subverted that into the simplest solution is the solution. Now shut up.
So the thing is, though, if you look at science, it's a long line of the simplest solution being wrong. Because it just, it's just broken down into a set of steps. Do you know what I mean? I mean, Newtonian mechanics, it's a simple solution, but it's not really right, is it? It's a model, it fits the world, but if you go into more detail, it doesn't really right, isn't how things actually work. So when you think about it, it just, I mean, to me, if someone says to me, well, the idea that big things need huge proof, meaning you can't prove them, to me that would mean if I was going to, lie to somebody, I just have to break it down into lots of little lies, But it brings me to the concept that what if, like, 50% of the people that are dressed weird actually are time travellers? Because if you think about it, what if they actually are? Because we always assuming that you're not a time traveller, so I always assume that they're like me, they're just, dressed a bit weird. Which I don't think I've dressed that weird, but I have done, I suppose, you don't really need to do much nowadays. You have a hat on for a man and that's all you need, But what if the people who dress weird are time travellers? Because when you think about it, it would make sense, wouldn't it? Why would they need to make any effort if, or at least a lot of them wouldn't make any effort if they didn't need to? And I suppose what would they do then? They'd move, if they needed money, they'd move into groups of people where they wouldn't stick out. Which means they'd probably move into accepting groups like occultists, some types of performers, They'd move into those groups. Which means, I'm thinking now, how many of the people I know are time travellers? Or could be.
Well, things that John Titor described were, first there was a civil war that occurred in the United States, and there was a big divide between rural areas and city areas. And there were, I don't know how familiar you are with things that have happened in the U.S. like the incident in Waco that occurred many years ago, the religious compound. The idea was that incidents like that, as people were trying to collect into their own communities, that there were interventions. And they were starting to happen on pretty much a weekly basis. The government was coming in and just trying to disrupt people's communities, and this all moved into a sort of a civil war. And ultimately, what ended all of that and created the final atmosphere that they had was Russia started launching nukes at the U.S. China scooped up Taiwan and Korea, and while the West is in turmoil, and so basically some shift in dealing with people's liberties turned into the Civil War, and then everything went to hell from there. He said the time travel technology originated with gravitational experiments that were done at CERN that ended up creating a mini black hole, and that became the foundation of this time travel theory. And it's interesting because sometime after hearing the story, I do remember seeing a little announcement about CERN around that time period, sort of in the 2004 area, where they were going to. They said they were looking at possibilities of doing gravitational experiments along the lines of what he described. I don't believe it ever happened, but it was certainly discussed, and that was.
Yeah. I suppose it's like the butterfly wings, isn't it? The idea that, a butterfly wings can cause a tornado somewhere else. And the trouble with that is it's getting people to understand that it's actually in things like weather, it's literal. Because you're talking these chaotic systems where tiny alterations can make a difference. So it certainly makes sense that somebody coming from the future would change things. And if you think about it, as humans, I think that's a good way to prevent war would be, even if we didn't come to the future, to predict it. Because people then would say, whoa, we've got to be careful, we can end up with a big war, and, we can end up all being killed. Where when people get sort of carried away with it, with war. Everyone's on their own side and they're just galloping along, you know. But if they have a warning beforehand, there probably wouldn't be any war, you know what I mean? People would work it out. You know, they get stuck in the moment.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying. I think I do. Well, if people have never experienced the John Titor story, to me it's just one of those things that makes you go, And it is interesting to see parallels that come up. The political climate globally is a little weird right now, and some of the kinds of things he described happening 10 years ago, the energy for those things feels possible right now. There seems to be a lot more crazy lately, and people backed up against the wall, so to speak, which is when people do the most desperate and spectacular things. So it could be that on some level this stuff does begin to bubble up, and I would recommend that everybody check out the Art Bell episodes. I'll get the links for those. I know that YouTube has some of them up to listen to, and that's where I first learned about it. And then it's also very easy to find sites that will talk about some of the history, talk about some of the predictions that he made. You can get access to the full transcripts of all the conversations that this guy had with people before he disappeared. And he did say he was going to go back home, and then at no point he just disappeared. And so the theory is that he went back home.
Yeah. I was just thinking, though, again about time travelers. I thought the idea that they wouldn't necessarily need to try and blend in. And I was thinking to make a list. I thought, well, if you came from another point in time, you'd probably surround yourself with things that wouldn't make sense to other people. So I was thinking, I thought, well, okay, you're probably going to dress weird. Now, you think about the fashions seem to go cyclic. So someone from the future could be dressed like someone from the past. And I thought, well, you'd probably, have things around you or work around things that made no sense to other people. And I thought, Saul, you are a time traveller. You dress weird. You're surrounded by weird items. Admit it. You are from the future. Okay, so that was... it may have been true. I had to try it out, Saul. I'm sorry you had to ask. Because you fitted all my criteria.
Well, but I guess you'd want to be careful with that, because if you challenge somebody from the future, they may have something to make you disappear.
But it's right, though, isn't it? The idea that we've all been programmed to think weird-looking people are actually, they're just normal like everybody else. And I'm thinking, well, maybe that's it. Maybe the weird-looking people are weird. Maybe that's that simple. But we just got to look at what type of weirdness it is. You look and you think, well, is that person a time traveler? Look and say, well, I don't know. It's maybe 50-50. So you say, okay, we've got a 50% chance of time travelling. What are we thinking, future or the past? And we're looking, we think, I think that person's from the future, some sort of messed up future. But that's the thing, isn't it? Maybe all you need to do is to just ask people. Because the funny story, actually, I didn't do when I was younger. I had this great idea. I thought, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to put something in the newspaper, right, for somebody from the future to meet me now, right? And, of course, nobody came up. But unfortunately, I never put the advert in the newspaper, so it made sense that they didn't turn up. You know what I mean? I was very young. I didn't think it through very well. But I thought that's the way to do it. You put an advert. You know what I mean? That's what we should do, Saul. Anyone from the future or the past, any time slips, we are here to help you. That can turn up for us. They do it and say hello,
Well, and it's... With TITOR, TITOR was from a relatively nearby time period, 2036.
Yeah.
So he wasn't so vastly disconnected from our world, not hundreds of years.
Yeah. And that's the thing, isn't it? They would normally choose something far off, but he didn't. He chose something very near. in time to when we are. And that, it makes sense, like I said, because it always seems that you tend to be influenced by the sci-fi films. I am from the year 3050, and we have an incredible technology, and my little finger can cause time travel, People would go over the top, but he didn't. And like you said, a lot of his predictions seem to even the ones that weren't exactly right, sort of played out. But it's also the idea that in the modern world you can find anybody, Certainly people who have connections, and some of the newspaper people and media would have had connections, they were going to be able to say who he was and where he came from in the world in no time. I know people think, maybe they don't have documents here, but in reality, in different places, in reality, they can find anybody if they want to. So the idea that nobody pulled out, all these big companies, and nobody said, aha, you're actually from blah-de-blah, and you were born here, nobody did that. And that, to me, is pretty good proof, because it would have been so easy to do. I know we all think we're unique and impossible to track, but we all are. We can all be tracked. So, and nobody pulled anything out.
Well, I also think about our own perspective of history. We tend to compress history quite a bit. You've been on the planet for a little while. Do you perceive any significant differences between life in the 60s, life in the 70s, life in the 80s, life today?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't around in the 60s, but I do perceive a difference, though, from the, from the 80s to the 90s. And there is a difference, but I know, like, as you say, in history, it will be classed as such a very small amount of time. And yet there's a huge difference. Even if we forget about computing and the internet, you go back and, the type of stuff, there is a difference, yeah. But like you said, it wouldn't seem that much in history terms. It would be like a line in a book.
I see what people do playing with historical recreation and things like that. And they look at something that is 16th century, right? And there's 100 years of the 16th century. And clothing and modes and culture and all of that evolved every generation just like it did for us. And so if you think about someone looking at the 20th century from the far future, the idea of everybody having a dance to big band music to raise war bonds while wearing a poodle skirt and a spiky mohawk. That's all 20th century stuff, right? Yeah. That works. That fits.
Yeah, that's what I always. Yeah, that's what I always thought was weird. Yeah. Exactly. That's what I always thought was weird about Latin. And you get people saying, and this person's learned classical Latin of the Roman Empire. But I always think, how does this work? You're talking like a several thousand-year period. And, if they put them down, they'd be able to understand it. They wouldn't. Language changes, Hell, it doesn't just change from decade to decade. It changes like throughout the year, or from year to year. It's a gradual change. But, in 50 years, there's a change, and the idea that these people know it, and you could, because they never say what period of Latin it is, which is it? It's never like, it's then. It's always like this whole big long period, and I think that's why I think that a lot of these ancient languages, or people like your Latin and your Greek, that some people put a lot of store by, are actually, to all intents and purposes, modern things entirely, because it's just too long to say you're going to analyse something over a couple of thousand years and then we're going to make something out of it. It's never going to be right, is it? Like you said, it will be like, it would be like mixing something from the 1980s and something from, from 1910 and putting it together and think, look, this is great, this is all right, but it's not,
like mixing Star Trek and Star Wars.
It is, it's just not right.
You can't do it. Well, I'm going to put together a special page with some of these Jan T links. Instead of just trying to put everything in the notes, we'll just have one link that'll go to a page with several things. If you've never explored John Titor, I encourage you to. If you kind of remember John Titor and have forgotten about him, it's time to revisit it. And it would be interesting for anyone who looks at this information to see if there are aspects of it that they recognize. Maybe things that he talks about that I didn't connect with, but that maybe someone else does. Something that maybe has occurred or was a pivotal point where our track ended up being different, or things you see lining up. Because there are some people that suggest that some predictions that John Titor made are still on the way, but our timeline has delayed it for some reason. Not avoided it, but delayed it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Yeah, because really people still tend to think of time as like a straight line. The idea that things change or that you've got different... Because really when you think about a time, you're talking about realities and dimensions and things like that, you know. So yeah, I agree with you. And I think it is important that people look into some of these things for themselves, to get the idea of possibilities. Because, yourself, it seems like the mainstream now is getting narrower and narrower, and people need to, grasp the idea of different realities and the idea that there's possibilities outside of this very narrow mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, if anyone does have any observations, it's time to report that on our little incident report mechanism that we have there.
Yeah.
Definitely take the opportunity to share whatever you discover, whatever you notice there with us, so that we can follow up on it in some way. Yeah,
and if anyone who is a time traveller wants to contact us, that would be great. Whether it's from the past or the future, anywhere at all. Other planets, that would be good as well. Okay, my name's S. Rob, and I've been talking to Saul Ravencraft.
Thank you, Rob.
This has been the World Magick Movement with S. Rob, Saul Ravencraft, Freddie Valentine. Production design by Mythmade Productions. Produced by S. Rob. Music, A Dark Blue Arc by Pipe Choir. Find them at freemusicarchive.org. This program is licensed for sharing under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share-alike 4.0 International. For more details about usage and sharing, see links in the program description or visit creativecommons.org. This program is licensed by Werevamp Media Limited. See program description for additional links to guest sites and supporting information.